The last person anyone expected to find in Kim Min-jae's industrial kitchen was a black teenager eating kimchi straight from the container. It was 2 a.m. when the Korean Mafia boss returned from a negotiation that had nearly turned bloody. His men secured the perimeter outside. He entered alone, needing a drink to steady his nerves. But then, a sound. Not footsteps, not breathing. The quiet scrape of chopsticks against ceramic. He moved silently through the darkness, hand instinctively reaching for the gun at his waist. In 15 years of running Seoul's most feared organization, intruders in his home meant one thing: violence. He rounded the corner into the kitchen and stopped cold. There, illuminated by the refrigerator light, stood a boy, maybe 16, 17 years old, dark skin, cornrows, wearing clothes 3 sizes too big. In his hands, a container of leftover japchae and a half-eaten piece of bulgogi. The boy froze when he saw Min-jae. Terror flooded his features. The container slipped from his fingers, noodles scattering across the marble floor. For a moment, neither moved. Then the boy did something unexpected. He didn't run, didn't beg. He straightened his spine and met Min-jae's eyes with a dignity that didn't match his circumstances. "I'm sorry," the boy said in Korean, his accent thick but understandable. "Please, don't hurt my mom. She doesn't know I'm here. This is my fault, not hers." Min-jae's hand moved away from his gun. His chest tightened in a way he didn't recognize. The boy's mother, Grace, his housekeeper of 2 years, the quiet woman who arrived before dawn and left after sunset, who cleaned blood from his floors without question, who prepared meals for his men without flinching when they discussed their business in her presence. This was her son. Min-jae had seen the boy once before, maybe twice, waiting outside the service entrance when Grace's shift ended. He'd never given him a second thought. Just another face, another insignificant person in a world full of people who didn't matter to men like him. But standing here now, watching this teenager tremble while trying to maintain his dignity, Min-jae saw something that made him pause. The boy's cheeks were hollow. His wrists were thin where they emerged from those oversized sleeves. Dark circles under his eyes spoke of hunger that had become routine. "What's your name?" Min-jae asked, his voice low and controlled. The boy's jaw clenched. Conflict warred across his young features. Truth versus self-preservation. "Marcus," he finally said. "Marcus Johnson." "How long have you been coming here, Marcus?" Marcus looked down at the spilled noodles, shame coloring his expression. 3 weeks, maybe 4. I wait until everyone's asleep. Take only what's already been thrown away. Food your chef was going to trash anyway. Min-jae stepped closer. Marcus flinched, but held his ground. Up close, the evidence was undeniable. The boy wasn't just thin. He was starving. His clothes hung on a frame that should have been filled out with teenage muscle. His sneakers had holes in them. The backpack at his feet looked like it had been salvaged from a dumpster. "Your mother works for me every day," Min-jae said slowly. "She earns good money. Why are you eating garbage from my kitchen?" Marcus's eyes flashed with something fierce. Loyalty. Pride. "My mum works 3 jobs, not just this one. She sends most of her money back to my grandmother in Itaewon. Grandma's sick. I need medicine. Mum gives me what she can, but it's never enough for both of us to eat properly. So I make sure she eats. I handle myself." "By stealing from me?" Marcus's chin lifted. "By surviving. There's a difference." The audacity of it struck Min-jae silent. This boy caught in his home in the middle of the night, still dared to argue semantics, still had enough pride to defend his actions as a necessity rather than theft. Min-jae thought about his own teenage years. Growing up in Busan, he watched his father work himself to death in factories. The nights when there wasn't enough food. The choices his mother had made, the ones that eventually led Min-jae to this life of violence and power. He'd been hungry once too, had eaten from dumpsters behind restaurants, had stolen fruit from market stalls. Hunger had a way of stripping away morality, leaving only the animal need to survive. "Where's your father?" Min-jae asked. The question made Marcus's expression shutter closed. "Dead. 3 years ago. Heart attack on a construction site. He was working overtime, no breaks, trying to pay off the medical debt from when I got sick as a kid. His body just gave out." The words were delivered flatly, as if emotion had been wrung out of them from repetition. Min-jae knew that tone, had used it himself when discussing his own father's death. "What about school?" "Dropped out 6 months ago," Marcus said. "Mum doesn't know. She thinks I'm still going. But we couldn't afford the fees anymore, and I couldn't keep showing up hungry, falling asleep in class, wearing the same clothes every day while the other kids had everything." He shrugged, a gesture that tried for casual, but landed on broken. "So I got a job, night shift at a convenience store. Pays almost nothing, but it's something. Mom thinks I'm at a friend's house studying when I'm actually working. Then I come here on my way home, eat whatever I can find, and sleep for 3 hours before starting over." Min-jae felt something crack inside his chest. This boy was 17 years old and living like a 40-year-old man. Working nights, scavenging for food, lying to his mother to protect her from the truth of their circumstances. "The food you were eating," Min-jae said, "that wasn't trash. That was tonight's dinner. My dinner." Marcus's face went pale. "I didn't know. I thought it was leftovers. I swear I only take what's being thrown away. I'm not a thief." "You just said you were surviving. Which is it?" "Both," Marcus said quietly. "I'm surviving by taking what rich people don't want anyway. That's not the same as stealing what someone needs." The logic was flawed, but understandable. Min-jae had used similar reasoning when he'd first started in this life. Taking from those who had more than they needed to give to those who had nothing. Of course, his definition of taking had evolved into something far more violent. "How often are you hungry, Marcus?" The directness of the question caught the boy off guard. His defenses crumbled slightly. "Always," he whispered. "Every day, every night. I can't remember the last time I felt full. I dream about food, wake up thinking about it. Spend my whole day at work staring at food I can't afford to buy." His voice cracked. "And the worst part is watching Mom pretend she's not hungry either. She gives me her portions and tells me she ate at work. I know she's lying. I know she's starving herself for me. But what can I do? I'm 17. I can't get a real job, can't make enough to change anything. So I eat trash from rich people's kitchens and tell myself it's temporary." Min-jae's hands clenched into fists, not from anger at Marcus, but from a rage so pure it surprised him. This woman, Grace, was working herself to death across 3 jobs, and her son was eating his employer's leftovers like a stray dog. Meanwhile, Min-jae threw away more food in a week than they probably ate in a month. Behind Min-jae, footsteps echoed in the hallway, heavy, purposeful. One of his lieutenants, Choi, appeared in the kitchen doorway. His hand rested on his weapon, eyes sharp and alert. "Boss," Choi said in Korean, his gaze locked on Marcus. "I heard something. Is there a problem?" Marcus had gone rigid, every muscle tense. He knew what these men were, knew what they were capable of. Min-jae saw the calculation happening behind the boy's eyes. Run or surrender. Fight or beg. "No problem," Min-jae said calmly in Korean. "Just checking on something. Go back to your post." Choi's eyes narrowed. "That's the cleaning woman's kid. What's he doing here at 2 a.m.? This was the moment. Min-jae could tell Choi the truth. His lieutenant would handle it efficiently. Marcus would disappear. Grace would be fired. Problem solved. The organization's security is maintained. His reputation for ruthlessness intact. Instead, Min-jae did something that would send shockwaves through his entire operation. "He's here because I asked him to come," Min-jae lied smoothly. "I needed someone to test the new security system, see if a teenager could bypass it. He did. We have work to do on the perimeter." Choi looked skeptical, but nodded slowly. "You want me to escort him out?" "No," Min-jae said. "I'll handle it. Go make sure the rest of the house is secure." As Choi disappeared, Min-jae turned back to Marcus. The boy was staring at him with an expression of complete confusion. "Why did you lie for me?" Marcus asked. "I don't know," Min-jae admitted, and it was true. He didn't know. In 15 years, he'd never lied to protect someone who'd violated his space, never shown mercy to an intruder, never cared about the circumstances that brought someone into his home uninvited. But something about this boy, this brave, starving teenager who loved his mother enough to risk everything for a scraps, had cracked something open inside Min-jae's chest, something he thought was dead. "Sit down," Min-jae said, gesturing to the kitchen table. Marcus hesitated. "I should go, before I cause more trouble." "Sit down." The command in Min-jae's voice was undeniable. Marcus lowered himself into a chair, his body language screaming flight response even as he obeyed. Min-jae opened the refrigerator, pulled out containers of food. Real food. Not leftovers. Not garbage. He heated everything in the microwave, then set it in front of Marcus. Galbi, fresh rice, kimchi jjigae, banchan of every variety. Marcus stared at the feast before him. "I can't accept this." "You're not accepting anything. You're eating while I decide what to do with you." It was a flimsy excuse, but it worked. Marcus picked up chopsticks with trembling hands and took a bite of galbi. His eyes closed. A sound escaped his throat, something between a sob and a sigh. Then he ate as a starving person eats, quickly, desperately, as if the food might disappear if he slowed down. Min-jae watched in silence. When was the last time he'd actually seen someone appreciate food? His men ate like it was fuel. He ate like it was routine, but Marcus ate like it was salvation. "Slower," Min-jae said quietly. "You'll make yourself sick." Marcus tried to slow down, but his body betrayed him. Months of hunger override conscious control. When he finally stopped, the containers were empty. He looked up at Min-jae with tears streaming down his face. "Thank you," Marcus whispered. "I don't understand why you're being kind to me, but thank you." Min-jae sat down across from him. "Tell me about your mother. What she doesn't tell me when she's here working." Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. The truth. Not the version she shows me." So Marcus told him. About how Grace had come to Korea 8 years ago, following Marcus's father, who'd gotten a contract job. How they'd planned to stay just long enough to save money and go back to the States. How the father had died, and left them stranded in a country where Grace barely spoke the language. How she'd worked every job she could find, cleaning, cooking, washing dishes. How she'd hidden their struggles from everyone, too proud to ask for help, too scared of deportation to seek assistance. "She sends money to my grandmother every month," Marcus said. "Grandma raised her, sacrificed everything for her. Now Grandma has diabetes, needs insulin, and needs care. Mum won't let her suffer, even if it means we suffer instead." The loyalty was crushing, beautiful and terrible at the same time. "You," Min-jae asked, "what do you want?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "What do I want? I want my mom to stop working herself to death. I want to go back to school. I want to eat 3 meals a day without guilt. I want to not be scared every single moment that something else will go wrong and we'll end up homeless." He leaned forward, intensity burning in his eyes. "But most of all, I want my mum to know that her sacrifices weren't for nothing, that I'm going to make something of myself, that I'm going to take care of her the way she took care of me." The words hit Min-jae like bullets. He saw himself in this boy. The same fierce determination, the same desperate love for a parent who'd given everything, the same hunger to prove that survival meant something. "What would you do?" Min-jae asked slowly, "if someone offered to help, really help, not charity, not pity, but real support?" Marcus's expression shuttered. "I'd ask what they wanted in return. Nobody helps people like us without wanting something." "Smart kid." "Fair enough," Min-jae said. "What if I told you I wanted nothing except to see you and your mother stop suffering?" "I'd say you're lying," Marcus said bluntly. "Men like you don't do things for free. I may be young, but I'm not stupid. I know what you are." "What do you do?" "My mum thinks I don't know, but I've seen the cars, the men with guns, the way people talk about Kim Min-jae in the streets." The honesty was refreshing. Most people lied to Min-jae, told him what they thought he wanted to hear. This boy just spoke the truth. "You're right," Min-jae admitted. "Men like me usually want something. But what I want from you isn't what you think." "Then what?" "I want you to give me a chance to be better than what I am." The words came out before Min-jae fully understood them himself. But once spoken, he realized they were true. He was tired of violence, of fear, of building an empire on other people's suffering. He couldn't change what he was, but maybe he could change what he did with his power. Marcus studied him with eyes too old for his age. "My mum always says that people can change if they want to badly enough. I never believed her. Thought it was just something poor people tell themselves to feel better." "Maybe your mum is wiser than both of us," Min-jae said. He stood up, made a decision that would alter everything. "Wait here." Min-jae went to his office, unlocked a safe, and pulled out cash. More money than Marcus had probably ever seen in his life. He returned to the kitchen and placed it on the table. Marcus's eyes went wide. "I can't take that. That's too much." "It's 3 months of salary," Min-jae said. "Advance payment for your mother's work, and a bonus for her excellent service." "But take it," Min-jae said firmly. "Give it to your mother. Tell her it's from me. Tell her she's earned it." Marcus reached for the money with shaking hands, then pulled back. "She'll ask questions. She'll want to know. Why?" "Tell her the truth, that I found you in my kitchen eating leftovers, and I decided it was time to pay people what they're actually worth." Min-jae paused. "And tell her that starting tomorrow, she's working for me full time." 1 job, not 3. Same pay as all 3 combined. Full benefits, and I want you back in school. Sir? I can't. Don't call me sir. My name is Min-jae. And yes, you can, you will, because I'm not asking. The command in his voice left no room for argument. Marcus clutched the money, tears flowing freely now. Why are you doing this? Broke into your home. I stole your food. You should hate me. Min-jae thought about his own father, about the day he'd stolen bread from a bakery and been caught, about the baker who could have called the police, but instead gave him a job, about how that one act of mercy had kept him alive long enough to become the man he was today. Because someone showed me kindness once when I didn't deserve it, Min-jae said quietly, and I never paid that debt forward. Until now. The next morning arrived with the kind of tension that precedes earthquakes. Min-jae hadn't slept. He'd spent the hours before dawn in his study, thinking about Marcus, about Grace, about all the invisible people who kept his world functioning while barely surviving themselves. At 5:30 a.m., Grace arrived, as she always did. Min-jae watched from his office window as she climbed the service stairs, her movements careful and efficient. She had no idea that her carefully constructed world was about to shift on its axis. He waited. Let her begin her routine. Let her believe this was just another ordinary day in the Kim household. At 7 a.m. sharp, Min-jae walked into the kitchen. Grace was there, preparing breakfast for his men. Her back was straight, her movements practiced, but he noticed things now that he'd missed before. The way she moved slowly, as if her body hurt. The shallow breathing that suggested exhaustion had become her baseline. The careful way she measured ingredients, as if every gram mattered. "Grace," he said in English. She turned, surprise flickering across her weathered features. In 2 years, he'd spoken directly to her maybe a dozen times. Bosses like Kim Min-jae didn't make small talk with the help. "Mr. Kim, sir," she said, her English crisp, despite her fatigue. "Is there something you need? Something wrong with the cleaning?" "Sit down." The colour drained from Grace's face. In her world, being asked to sit meant termination. It meant the end of steady income, the end of the money she sent her mother, the end of everything holding her life together. "Sir, please, if I've done something wrong, sit down, Grace." She lowered herself into one of the kitchen chairs, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Min-jae could see her trembling, though she tried to hide it. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down too. This simple act, a Korean Mafia boss sitting at his own kitchen table with his black housekeeper, would have shocked his organization if anyone witnessed it. "I met your son last night." Grace's face went through a series of expressions. Confusion, then understanding, then absolute terror. "Marcus, oh God. Mr. Kim, I'm so sorry. I swear I didn't know he was coming here. I'll talk to him. Please don't call the police. Please don't fire me. We need this job. We need—" "Grace." Min-jae's voice was gentle but firm. "Stop." She pressed her lips together, tears already forming. "How long has your son been hungry?" The question caught her completely off guard. She'd been preparing for anger, for consequences, for the end of everything. She hadn't expected this. "I don't understand what you mean, sir." "Grace," he said, "how long has Marcus been hungry?" The dam broke. Tears she'd been holding back for months, maybe years, finally spilled over. "Since my husband died," she whispered. "Since the medical bills started coming. Since I realized that working one job, even 2 jobs, wasn't enough. I thought if I worked 3, if I just worked hard enough, I could keep us afloat. But it's never enough. The words poured out in a rush. Years of struggle compressed into painful honesty. I give him everything I can, but he's a growing boy, 17 years old. He needs so much more than I can provide. I see him getting thinner. I hear his stomach growling at night. I watch him pretend he's full when I know he's starving. And I hate myself. I hate that I can't give him what he needs. Min-jae leaned forward. Why didn't you ask for help? Ask me for more hours, higher pay, anything. Grace looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much hardship. Men like you don't help women like me, Mr. Kim. We're invisible. We clean your homes and cook your food, and we're grateful for whatever scraps we get. We don't ask for more, because asking means losing what little we have. The words stung because they were true. Min-jae had never once thought about Grace's life outside his home, never wondered if she had enough, never cared if she was struggling. She'd been invisible by design, and he'd never bothered to look. Your son dropped out of school, Min-jae said. Grace's hand flew to her mouth. No, he's still going. He leaves every morning with his backpack. He's working night shift at a convenience store, Min-jae interrupted gently. He's been lying to you to protect you from the truth, just like you've been lying to him about eating. Grace broke down completely then, sobbing into her hands. Min-jae sat there awkwardly for a moment, unused to tears that weren't born of fear or pain he'd caused. Then he did something else that would have shocked his organization. He placed a gentle hand on Grace's shoulder and waited for her to compose herself. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red, but filled with a desperation he recognized. The desperation of a parent who would do anything for their child. I'll work harder, Grace said, quickly. I'll take extra shifts. I'll do whatever you need. Just please don't punish Marcos for my failures. Please don't. Grace, stop. Min-jae's voice cut through her panic. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm fixing a problem I should have noticed 2 years ago. He pulled an envelope from his jacket and placed it on the table. Grace stared at it like it might explode. What is this? Open it. With trembling hands, Grace opened the envelope. Her face went white as she saw the cash inside. Mr. Kim, I can't. This is... How much is this? 3 months advance salary and a bonus, Min-jae said. But that's not all. Starting today, you work only for me. 1 job, 40 hours a week. Same total pay as all 3 of your jobs combined. Full health insurance, paid sick leave, and a housing allowance. Grace shook her head, unable to process what she was hearing. I don't understand. Why would you do this? Because I found your son eating my leftovers like a stray dog, Min-jae said bluntly. And I realized that I've been part of the problem. I pay you barely enough to survive while I throw away more money in a week than you make in a year. That ends today. But the other families you work with, I'll compensate them for losing you. This isn't negotiable, Grace. This is how it's going to be. Grace stared at the money, then at Min-jae, then back at the money. What do you want in return? The question was valid. In her experience, men with power never gave without taking. I want Marcus back in school, Min-jae said. Full time. I'll pay for everything, tuition, books, uniform, whatever he needs. And I want you both to stop suffering. That's what I want. Mr. Kim, Grace's voice broke. I don't know what to say. I don't understand why you're being so kind." "Neither do I," Min-jae admitted. "But I'm tired of being the kind of man who lets good people starve while I waste everything." He stood up, his decision made. "There's one more thing. Your mother in Itaewon, the one who needs insulin." Grace's eyes went wide. "How did you—" "Marcus told you." "He did. I'm setting up a medical fund. Your mother will get the care she needs. No more choosing between food and medicine. No more sacrifices." Grace broke down again, this time with relief so profound it seemed to physically hurt. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you. Thank you." Min-jae left her there, crying at his kitchen table, clutching money that would change her life. He went to his office and made phone calls that would ripple through his entire organization. His accountant questioned the expenses. His lieutenants questioned his judgment. His associates in other families whispered that Kim Min-jae had gone soft. Let them whisper. That afternoon, Min-jae did something unprecedented. He drove to the convenience store where Marcus worked. The boy was behind the counter, with dark circles under his eyes, fighting to stay awake. When Marcus saw Min-jae walk in, terror and confusion warred on his face. "We need to talk," Min-jae said. They went outside. Min-jae leaned against his car, this vehicle that cost more than Grace's annual salary. "Your mother knows," Min-jae said, "about school, about everything." Marcus's face crumbled. "Is she mad?" "She's heartbroken, but not at you. At herself for not seeing it sooner." Min-jae pulled out a folder. "Enrollment papers for Seoul International School. Best education in the city. You start Monday." Marcus took the folder with shaking hands. "Sir, I already told you. I can't—" "Oh, you're not listening, Marcus. This isn't a request. This is happening. Your mother is working for me full-time now. One job, good pay, benefits. You're going back to school. These are facts, not options." "Why are you doing this?" Marcus asked. "You don't even know us." Min-jae thought about his answer, about all the complex reasons and the simple truth underneath them all. "Because I see you," he said finally. "Both of you, and I'm tired of pretending invisible people don't exist." Marcus's eyes filled with tears. This strong, proud young man who'd survived so much. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me. Just promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll work hard in school, that you'll make something of yourself, that you'll prove all of this wasn't wasted." Min-jae's voice was fierce. "Promise me that you'll be better than men like me, that you'll use your education to help people instead of hurt them." Marcus nodded, unable to speak. "And one more thing," Min-jae said. "Stop eating from my kitchen in the middle of the night. If you're hungry, ring the bell like a human being and ask for food like you have dignity. Because you do. You always did. I just failed to see it." That evening, as Min-jae sat in his study reviewing the financial restructuring he'd ordered, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. It was Marcus. "Thank you for seeing us. I promise I'll make you proud." Min-jae stared at those words for a long time. Make him proud. When was the last time anyone had wanted to make him proud? When was the last time he'd done something worth being proud of? 6 months later, Kim Min-jae's organization looked the same from the outside. Same territory, same operations, same reputation that made other families think twice before challenging him. But inside, everything had changed. Grace had transformed from an invisible employee to a trusted member of his household. She managed his home with the dignity she'd always deserved, her health fully restored, her confidence rebuilt. She sent money to her mother without guilt now, knowing there was enough for everyone. Marcus thrived in ways that surprised everyone, especially Min-jae. He excelled at Seoul International, made friends across every social class, and somehow managed to turn the most feared man in Seoul into someone who knew the difference between calculus and trigonometry. But the real transformation was Min-jae himself. His men still feared him. His enemies still respected his power. But something fundamental had shifted. He found himself asking different questions in business meetings. Not just about profit, but about people. Not just about taking, but about the cost of what they took. The other crime families tested him, seeing if his mercy made him weak. They learned quickly that compassion and ruthlessness could coexist in the same man. Min-jae was still dangerous, perhaps more so now that he had people worth protecting. One evening, as Min-jae sat in his study, reviewing legitimate business proposals he'd started investing in, Marcus appeared in his doorway, wearing his school uniform and carrying a report card. "Mr. Kim?" Marcus said, using the formal address despite Min-jae's repeated requests to drop it. "I wanted to show you this." The report card showed straight A's, perfect marks across every subject. Min-jae stared at the paper, that familiar crack in his chest, widening until it felt like his heart might actually burst. "This is excellent, Marcus. I wanted you to know that your investment is paying off," Marcus said formally. Then his composure cracked slightly. "And I wanted to say thank you, again, for everything." Min-jae set down the report card and really looked at the boy. Not a boy anymore, really. Marcus had filled out over the past 6 months. Good food and less stress had let his body develop properly. He stood taller now, carried himself with confidence that came from knowing he mattered. "You don't need to keep thanking me," Min-jae said. "I think I do," Marcus replied, "because you changed my life. You changed my mum's life. You saw us when we were invisible. That deserves thanks every single day." "Your mother did the hard work," Min-jae said. "She kept you both alive through impossible circumstances. She's the hero in this story, not me." "She says the same thing about you," Marcus said with a slight smile. "You two should just agree that you're both heroes and stop arguing about it." Min-jae found himself smiling back. When was the last time he'd smiled genuinely? "How is your grandmother?" "Good. Really good. The new insulin is working. She's gaining weight, feeling stronger. Mum video calls her every night, and they both cry happy tears." Marcus's expression grew serious. "Mr. Kim, I've been thinking about what I want to do after school, what I want to study in university. And I want to study social work, maybe law. I want to help people like my mum, people who work hard but can't get ahead, people who are invisible to everyone else." Marcus's eyes were bright with purpose. "I want to use what you've given me to make sure other kids don't have to eat leftovers from rich people's kitchens to survive." The words hit Min-jae harder than any bullet ever had. This boy, this brave young man, wasn't going to use his second chance to get rich or gain power. He was going to use it to help others climb out of the same hole he'd escaped. "That's a good path," Min-jae said, his voice rougher than usual. "A better path than mine." "Your path brought you to that kitchen at 2 a.m., Marcus said. "Your path made you stop and see me instead of just having me thrown out or arrested. Maybe your path wasn't perfect, but it led to something good in the end." Min-jae stared at this teenager who'd somehow become wise beyond his years. "When did you get so philosophical?" When I stopped being hungry all the time, Marcus said with brutal honesty, it's easier to think about big questions when you're not constantly thinking about where your next meal is coming from. That night, after Marcus left, Min-jae made more phone calls. Not about territories or deals or eliminating problems, but about establishing something new. A foundation, not in his name, but in Marcus and Grace's names. A fund to help struggling families, to pay medical bills for people without insurance, to give second chances to people society had decided didn't matter. His accountant thought he was crazy. His lieutenants questioned whether he'd lost his edge. His competitors whispered that Kim Min-jae had gone soft. None of them understood that finding Marcus in his kitchen hadn't made him soft. It had made him remember what it felt like to be human. 2 years later, Marcus graduated from Seoul International at the top of his class. Full scholarship offers from universities around the world. Grace sat in the audience, wearing a dress Min-jae had insisted on buying her, tears of pride streaming down her face. Min-jae sat beside her, feeling something he'd never felt before. Not the satisfaction of a successful deal or the rush of winning a territory dispute. This was different, deeper. This was the feeling of watching someone you'd helped become everything they were meant to be. When Marcus walked across that stage to accept his diploma, he looked directly at Min-jae and Grace and mouthed 2 words. Thank you. Min-jae felt his throat tighten. This boy who'd once eaten his leftovers in secret now stood on a stage accepting awards for academic excellence. This young man, who'd been invisible to everyone, now stood in front of hundreds of people, being celebrated for his achievements. After the ceremony, as students and parents mingled, Marcus found Min-jae standing alone near the entrance. Mr. Kim, Marcus said, I need to tell you something. What is it? I got accepted to Seoul National University, full scholarship. I'll be studying social welfare with a minor in law. Marcus's voice was strong, certain. And I'm going to use everything you've taught me about power and influence to change the system that made my mom work 3 jobs and still couldn't feed her son. Min-jae felt something break open in his chest, pride mixed with something that felt almost like redemption. That's exactly what you should do. Marcus stepped closer, his voice dropping. But I also wanted to tell you that I'm not ashamed anymore of where I came from, of eating your leftovers, of being poor and black and invisible in a city that didn't want to see me. His eyes were fierce now, because all of that made me who I am. And who I am is someone who's going to make sure no other kid has to go through what I did. You're going to change the world, Marcus, Min-jae said quietly. I believe that. Maybe, Marcus said, but you changed mine first. You and my mom. You both showed me that family isn't about blood or race or where you come from. It's about who shows up when you need them most. Grace appeared then, her face glowing with happiness Min-jae had never seen before. She looked at her son, then at Min-jae, and her eyes filled with tears. Thank you, she said to Min-jae, for seeing us, for saving us, for giving my son a future I couldn't give him alone. You gave him everything that mattered, Min-jae said. Courage, integrity, love. I just gave him opportunities. You gave him character. Grace pulled Min-jae into a hug that surprised them both. In 2 years of working for him, they'd never embraced. But this moment called for it. This moment of Marcus's triumph belonged to all 3 of them. As they stood there, this unlikely family bound not by blood, but by circumstance and choice, Min-jae thought about the path that had led him here. All the violence, all the fear, all the power he'd accumulated. None of it had ever felt as meaningful as this. One act of mercy, one decision to see instead of overlooking, one choice to help instead of hurt. That's all it had taken to change 3 lives forever. The other families still whispered that Kim Min-jae had gone soft. They were wrong. He'd simply remembered that true power isn't measured by how many people fear you. It's measured by how many people you lift when they're down. That evening, as Min-jae returned to his home, he walked through his industrial kitchen. The same kitchen where he'd found Marcus eating leftovers 2 years ago. The same place where everything had changed. He opened his refrigerator, looked at the abundance inside, and made a decision. Tomorrow, he'd start a program. Free meals for working families. A community kitchen in the neighborhood where Grace and Marcus used to live. Not charity, dignity. A place where people could come and eat without shame, without fee, without having to steal scraps in the middle of the night. His men would question it. His accountant would complain about the cost. His enemies would see it as a weakness. He didn't care anymore. Because Kim Min-jae had learned something that night 2 years ago. The most dangerous thing you can do to a man like him isn't to threaten his territory or challenge his power. It's to show him what he's been missing. To crack open that carefully constructed armor and let him feel something again. Marcus had done that. A hungry teenager eating japchae in the dark had somehow reached the part of Min-jae that still remembered being human. 3 years later, the foundation Min-jae had established had helped over 500 families. Grace managed it full-time now, using her experience to identify people who needed help. She'd become a voice for the invisible, a bridge between the powerful and the powerless. Marcus was in his 2nd year at Seoul National, working part-time at a legal aid clinic, already making a difference. He'd been featured in news articles about exceptional students giving back to their communities. The boy who once ate leftovers was now feeding others. Min-jae's organization had evolved too. Still powerful, still feared, but tempered now with something he'd never bothered with before. Conscience. He'd started paying fair wages throughout his businesses, providing healthcare, creating opportunities for people who'd been invisible. His rivals called it weakness. His accountant called it financial suicide. Min-jae called it the first time in his life he could look in the mirror without flinching. One evening, as Min-jae sat in his study, his phone rang. It was Marcus, calling from the university. "Mr. Kim, I wanted to tell you something before you see it in the news." "What is it?" "I'm doing an interview about my story, about being homeless, eating from your kitchen, and how you changed everything." Marcus paused. "I wanted your permission first. I know you value your privacy." Min-jae was quiet for a moment. Letting the story go public would expose him. It would show a vulnerability his enemies could exploit. It would reveal that the feared Kim Min-jae had a weakness, compassion. "Tell the story," Min-jae said finally. "Tell all of it. If it helps even one person, one family, one hungry kid, then it's worth whatever consequences come to me." "Are you sure?" "This could. I'm sure, Marcus. Tell them how you survived. Tell them how your mother worked herself to exhaustion. Tell them how I almost missed seeing you both, because I'd stopped looking at people as people." Min-jae's voice was steady. "And tell them that change is possible, that men like me can choose to be better, that invisible people deserve to be seen." Marcus was quiet for a moment. You know this will change how people see you. The other families, your reputation, everything. Good, Min-jae said. That reputation was built on fear. Maybe it's time to build something on hope instead. The interview went viral. Within days, Kim Min-jae's face was everywhere. Not as a feared crime boss, but as the man who'd found a hungry teenager in his kitchen and decided to help instead of hurt. The story resonated across Seoul, across Korea, across the world. Other wealthy families started their own programs. Other powerful men started asking themselves if they'd been overlooking the invisible people in their own lives. Marcus became a symbol. Grace became a hero. And Min-jae became something he'd never expected, a catalyst for change. But the attention brought danger too. Rivals saw an opportunity in his perceived weakness. Enemies who wanted to test if. Compassion had made him vulnerable. They learned quickly that mercy and strength weren't mutually exclusive. Min-jae protected his people, his organization, his unlikely family with the same ruthless efficiency he'd always had. The difference was that now he knew what he was protecting and why it mattered. One night, 5 years after finding Marcus in his kitchen, Min-jae received an unexpected visitor. Marcus arrived at the mansion, no longer a teenager, but a young man of 22. Confident, educated, purposeful. "Mr. Kim," Marcus said, using that formal address he'd never dropped despite Min-jae's protests. "I wanted to show you something." He handed Min-jae a business card. Marcus Johnson, J.D., attorney at law, specializing in family advocacy and social justice. "You finished law school," Min-jae said, pride swelling in his chest. 3 years instead of 4. Graduated top of my class. Marcus's smile was bright. "And I've accepted a position at a non-profit law firm. We represent families facing eviction, workers being exploited, people who can't afford justice." "This is everything you said you'd do," Min-jae said. "You did it, Marcus. You made it." "We did it," Marcus corrected. "You, me, Mom. We all did this together." He sat down across from Min-jae. "But I wanted to ask you something. A favor. Anything? Be one of my first clients. Not because you need legal help, but because I want to represent the foundation, the one you started in our names. I want to make sure it's legally protected, that it continues helping families long after all of us are gone." Marcus leaned forward. "I want to build something that lasts. Something that makes sure no kid ever has to eat leftovers from a stranger's kitchen to survive." Min-jae felt his throat tighten. This young man had taken the worst moment of his life and transformed it into purpose, had taken pain and turned it into the power of different kinds. "I'd be honored," Min-jae said. "Thank you, Marcus, for becoming exactly who you were meant to be." "Thank you for letting me," Marcus replied. Then, after a pause, "You know, I used to be so angry. At my dad for dying. At the world for being unfair. At myself for being hungry and helpless and invisible." His voice was thoughtful now. "But that night in your kitchen, when you saw me, really saw me, something changed. I realized that being invisible wasn't my fault. And being seen wasn't charity. It was just human decency that should have been there all along." "You taught me that," Min-jae admitted. "I'd forgotten what it meant to see people as people, instead of obstacles or assets or threats. You reminded me." "Then we taught each other," Marcus said. "You taught me that people can change. I taught you that people are worth changing for. That seems fair." As Marcus left that evening, Min-jae stood at his window, watching the young man walk to his car. Not the desperate teenager sneaking through shadows anymore. Not the scared boy clutching stolen food. But a confident attorney is about to change the world one family at a time. Min-jae thought about the path that had led here, all the choices, good and bad, all the violence and fear and power that had defined his life for so long. None of it had prepared him for the moment that actually mattered, the moment when he'd opened a pantry door and seen a hungry child, the moment when he'd chosen mercy over violence, the moment when he'd decided that invisible people deserved to be seen. That single choice had rippled outward in ways he never could have imagined. Changed lives, changed policies, changed how people thought about wealth and poverty and responsibility. And it had changed him most of all. Kim Min-jae was still powerful, still feared when necessary, still ran his organization with an iron hand when the situation called for it. But now he also ran a foundation that had helped thousands. Now he employed people fairly. Now he looked at faces instead of past them. Now he saw people, all because a brave teenager had risked everything for food, and Min-jae had chosen to see his humanity instead of his transgression. Years later, when Grace finally retired, Min-jae threw her a party that scandalized his entire organization. A Mafia boss is celebrating his former maid's retirement with the same ceremony he'd give a lieutenant. But Grace had earned it. She'd worked 3 jobs while raising a son alone. She'd survived poverty and loss and discrimination. She'd kept her dignity when the world tried to strip it away. And she'd raised a son who would change thousands of lives. At the party, Grace pulled Min-jae aside. "You know," she said, her English still carrying that beautiful accent, "when I first started working for you, I was terrified. I heard all the stories about Kim Min-jae, the ruthless boss, the dangerous man." She smiled. "But you know what I learned?" "What?" "That dangerous men can choose to be good, that powerful men can choose to be kind, that the scariest thing about you wasn't your reputation, it was your capacity to change." She squeezed his hand. "Thank you for choosing to change, for my son, for me, for everyone you've helped since." Min-jae felt tears prick his eyes, something that would have been unthinkable years ago. "Thank you for raising a son brave enough to risk everything for food, brave enough to look a dangerous man in the eye and speak the truth. Marcus saved me as much as I saved him." "Then we saved each other," Grace said simply. "And that's what family does. Family." The word settled over Min-jae like a blanket. Not the family of blood he'd lost long ago, not the family of the criminal organization he'd built, but the family he'd chosen. Grace, who'd worked for him and become his conscience. Marcus, who'd stolen from him and become his redemption. This unlikely, impossible family is bound together by hunger and mercy and the choice to see each other as human. As the party continued, Min-jae watched Marcus laugh with Grace, watched them dance together, watched the pure joy on their faces. Joy he'd helped make possible, joy that made every sacrifice, every difficult choice, every moment of vulnerability worth it. His men still whispered sometimes, questioned whether he'd gone soft, wondered if compassion had made him weak. They didn't understand that it had made him stronger, because now he had something worth protecting beyond territory or profit or reputation. Now he had people he loved, and a man who loves is far more dangerous than a man who only fears. The foundation continued to grow. Marcus eventually became its director, working alongside his mother to help families across Korea. They named it the Kitchen Foundation, in honor of where it all began. In honor of a hungry boy, stolen food, and a powerful man who'd chosen mercy over vengeance. Min-jae's story became a legend in Seoul. The Mafia boss who found his heart in his kitchen at 2 a.m. The powerful man who learned to see invisible people. The feared leader who discovered that true strength is measured not by how many people you can hurt, but by how many you can help. And it all started with Marcus Johnson eating leftover japchae in the dark. A desperate act of survival that became a catalyst for change. One hungry teenager who taught a powerful man what it meant to be human again. Sometimes the most important moments in our lives come disguised as problems, as threats, as people we'd normally overlook or eliminate or ignore. Marcus could have been just another intruder, just another person Min-jae threw away without a second thought. Instead, he became the mirror that showed Min-jae who he really was, beneath all the power and fear. And more importantly, who he could become. Because that's the thing about seeing people, really seeing them. Once you start, you can't stop. Once you recognize someone's humanity, you have to recognize everyone's. Once you help one person, you have to ask yourself why you're not helping more. Marcus opened Min-jae's eyes, and once opened, they couldn't close again. Couldn't unsee the suffering around him. Couldn't ignore the invisible people keeping his world running while barely surviving themselves. So Min-jae changed. Not perfectly, not completely. He was still who he was, still operated in a world of violence and power. But now he balanced it. Now he used that power to lift people, instead of just pushing them down. Now he saw faces in the crowd. Now he remembered the names of the people who cleaned his floors and cooked his food and made his life possible. Now he treated them with the dignity they'd always deserved. And that made all the difference. Not just for Grace and Marcus, not just for the thousands of families the foundation helped, but for Min-jae himself. Because living a life where you see people who matter to someone, and someone matters to you, where your choices help instead of hurt, that's the kind of life worth living. On the 10th anniversary of the night he'd found Marcus in his kitchen, Min-jae hosted a small dinner. Just him, Grace, Marcus, and Marcus's new wife, a fellow attorney he'd met at the legal aid clinic. They sat in that same kitchen where it had all begun. Ate japchae and bulgogi and kimchi jjigae, the same food Marcus had once stolen, the same food that had changed everything. To invisible people, Marcus said, raising his glass, may they all be seen. To second chances, Grace added, may they be given freely. To family, Min-jae finished, however we find it. They drank together, this impossible family. A Korean mafia boss, a black American mother, her attorney son, and his wife, bound together by hunger and mercy and the simple choice to see each other as human. Outside, Seoul glittered with lights. Millions of people are living their lives, some visible, some invisible. Some are struggling, some are thriving. But because of what happened in this kitchen 10 years ago, hundreds of them were eating tonight, who might not have otherwise. Hundreds of families had been helped. Hundreds of children didn't have to steal food to survive. That was Min-jae's real legacy. Not the territory he'd controlled, or the power he'd wielded, or the fear he'd inspired, but the lives he'd changed by choosing mercy over vengeance, by choosing to see instead of overlooking, by choosing to be human instead of just powerful. And it all started with a hungry boy eating leftovers in the dark. Sometimes that's all it takes. One moment, one choice, one decision to see someone instead of looking past them. One act of mercy that ripples outward in ways you never imagined. Marcus Johnson had been starving and invisible. Now he was an attorney, helping hundreds. Grace Johnson had been working herself to death across 3 jobs. Now she runs a foundation changing thousands of lives. Kim Min-jae had been a feared criminal boss with no one to care about, and no one who cared about him. Now he had a family. Now he had a purpose. Now he had something worth living for beyond mere survival or accumulation of power. All because he'd walked into his kitchen at 2 a.m. and chosen to see a hungry teenager instead of just an intruder. All because he'd asked why instead of just reacting with violence. That's the power of being seen. That's the power of seeing others. It changes everything. Marcus had taught him that. A brave 17-year-old eating stolen japchae had taught the most feared man in Seoul what it meant to be human. And Min-jae had spent the last 10 years proving he'd learned the lesson. Proving that people can change. Proving that mercy isn't weakness. Proving that the invisible people society overlooks are often the ones who matter most. As the evening wound down and his family prepared to leave, Marcus pulled Min-jae aside one last time. "You know," Marcus said quietly, "I used to think that night in the kitchen was the worst moment of my life. Getting caught. Being so desperate. I'd risk everything for scraps." He smiled. But it was actually the best moment, because it led to this, to everything we've built, to the family we've become. "Thank you for being brave enough to risk it," Min-jae said. "Thank you for being kind enough to see me," Marcus replied. They embraced. These 2 men from completely different worlds who'd found each other in a kitchen at 2 a.m., who'd chosen each other, who'd saved each other. And that's what really matters in the end. Not how much power you have, or how much money you make, or how many people fear your name. What matters is whether you see people, whether you help when you can, whether you choose mercy over vengeance, whether you build families out of love instead of obligation, whether you use your power to lift people instead of keeping them down. Kim Min-jae had learned all of that from Marcus Johnson, a hungry, invisible teenager who taught him how to be human again. 10 years later, Marcus's foundation had helped over 5,000 families. Grace had trained an entire staff of caseworkers who understood poverty because they'd lived it. Min-jae had transformed from a feared criminal to an unlikely philanthropist, using his power and resources to change systems instead of just exploiting them. And it all started with leftover japchae, with a boy eating in the dark, with a powerful man who chose to see instead of overlooking, with mercy given freely, with family built on choice. That's the real story. Not about a mafia boss or a poor teenager or dramatic transformations, but about the simple, profound truth that we all have the power to change someone's life. We just have to choose to see them first. Before we end, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and give this video a like if this story moved you. Because stories like this remind us that everyone matters. Everyone deserves to be seen. Everyone deserves dignity and mercy and a second chance. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that invisible people matter. That change is possible. That one act of kindness can ripple outward and transform everything. Kim Min-jae would tell you that finding Marcus in his kitchen was the moment that saved his life. Marcus would tell you that being found was the moment that saved him. Grace would tell you that both her men saved each other. And they'd all be right, because that's what happens when we choose to see each other, when we choose mercy over judgment, when we choose love over fear. We all get saved. Sometimes by giving help, sometimes by receiving it, but always by recognizing that we're all human, all struggling, all are deserving of dignity. That's the lesson. That's the story. That's what matters. A Korean mafia boss and a black teenager eating japchae together 10 years after one stole it, and one chose mercy. That's family. That's redemption. That's hope. And it all started with being hungry and being seen. Remember that the next time you walk past someone invisible, the next time you have the power to help or hurt, the next time you face someone desperate and struggling, choose to see them, choose mercy, choose to be human, because you never know whose life you might change, or how they might change yours.